This post is going to be all about the truth about past lives and Akashic records. And the reason I give a little chuckle is there's a lot of misinformation floating around out there. And there's a lot of things that I feel require clarity, maybe aren't clear, or maybe are a little complex. And so I wanted to dive into it. So the different topics I want to talk about is red flags from Akashic readers. So what you should look out for as somebody who might be seeking an Akashic record reading. I want to talk about the different Akashic record dimensions, because it's not just one, or there isn't just one big library out there. Like, everybody has their own Akashic records, and there are collective Akashic records that exist in different dimensions as well. I also want to talk about the difference between past lives and other lives, because when I say past lives, I use it more as a cover phrase, but really I'm talking about multidimensional spectrums and timelines. So it's very quantum in that regard. I want to talk about soul fragments from other lifetimes, how the DNA and the Akashic records intertwine or correspond. Speaking of intertwining, I want to talk about quantum entanglement, soul contracts, and assigned purpose. So let's get into it. Before we continue on to the video, I want to talk about this amazing new AI tool called Legalese Decoder. This thing is super cool because you can take an entire legal document full of all of this legal jargon that you cannot understand, copy it and paste it, and it will translate it into plain English or any other language that you need to translate it into. Totally worth it, guys. There's a lot of different memberships available, and this thing is bomb for tax time, which we're still technically in, just as a sidebar. So definitely check it out. Go ahead and click on the link in the drop down menu below. See you on the other side. So I'm actually going to start with the red flags. So because I feel like red flags should go in the beginning of things, you should see them and then you can avoid things right away. Some of this I might have talked about in passing on Facebook or on Patreon, but not to this extent. So I'm going to dive into it. So things to look for as a client. Now, first of all, it's a good practice. This is what I recommend. Before you book with somebody, send them a message and ask them some personal questions. And then when I say personal, I don't mean like about their personal life. I mean, ask them questions about how they do their practice. What is their process for doing readings? Do they connect and disconnect the energy? Are they cleansing their energy on a regular basis? What are the spirits they work with? How do they do the reading? What's their definition of Akashic readings? Things of that nature. And the reason I say that is you don't want to, for example, get a reading from somebody who works with spirits that maybe you're out of alignment with, or maybe don't align with your particular ancestry, multidimensionally speaking, right? Or maybe they're on a different vibrational spectrum that you want than what you'd want to be on at this time, right? You definitely don't want to work with people that do not cleanse their energy on a regular basis, or don't know how, or don't protect their energy. And you definitely do not want to be getting a reading from somebody who doesn't disconnect the reading at the end. Now, it doesn't mean that they have to do it in your presence. Some readers will wait till afterward, they're subtle about it. They may do like a gesture, or they may have a certain ritual, but you want to make sure that they are, disconnecting the energy. You want to make sure that they are asking permission to access your records, right? You don't want it to be a situation where they can just tap in and out wherever they want. So these are all things to look for. Now, here are some red flags. The reader does not disconnect energy at the end. So if you email them, or you message them, or you call them on the phone, depending on the type of reading and if it's, in close proximity or not, and you ask them, hey, when you do your readings, do you connect and disconnect the energy? And they just act like they don't know what you're talking about, or they say no, or they explain their process and doesn't include that. You can just be like, okay, well, thank you anyway. Because you do not want you don't want them draining your energy, whether it's conscious or unconscious, by having that energy connected. You don't want spirits to pass between you. You don't want portals to be left open. And most importantly, you just want to make sure that your energy is sovereign and that you're maintaining your power and energy, right? So again, it doesn't have to be like a maleficent intent or anything like that. It could just be that maybe they don't know to do those things. Maybe they weren't taught. They could be a brand new reader, things like that. Another thing, again, the red flag is if they don't scan or cleanse their energy. So if you contact them and they're like, hey, how often do you cleanse your energy? And if they mention, I sage my space once a week. What about your energy? I like sage myself, once a week or whatever. I mean, that's better than nothing, but you really want to hear somebody saying something like, oh, I do, regular energy cleansing. I scan myself. I check for parasites and entities and thought forms and things like that, energetically at multiple dimensions, and they could use various tools. That's fine. But this seems to be like, a very regular thing. So yeah, you don't have to check for parasites, for example, every single day, but you should be cleansing your energy every single day. Okay, another red flag. This is a big one that I see, honestly. If a reader starts claiming that you are some god or goddess or some famous figure or person or character in your reading, and that's all that's there, that's a huge red flag. That person's just telling you what you want to hear. And maybe that is what they think they're seeing, but it's very unlikely. So that person's definitely not somebody that you want to get a reading from or want to take to heart, okay? It may be nice and stroke the ego, but it doesn't make it true. So another red flag is if a reader has to use oracles of any kind or cards to access the Akashic records. Here's what I mean. Like, for example, nothing wrong with using oracles. I use divination oracles all the time. Do I use it for the Akashic records? No. Why is that? Because the Akashic records is an actual realm and vibration that you access. It's not a tool that you use for intuitive guidance. There's a big difference there. It's not a tool that you use to hear from certain spirits or guardians. This is you literally accessing that person's etheric and multidimensional DNA and energy spectrum. You can't do that with cards. I'm sorry. Just can't, guys. And then the last red flag I would say would be if a reader avoids the topic of shadow work, doesn't know about shadow work, doesn't mention the underworld, or any other lifetimes that may need healing. Now, they don't have to, like if it's a reading, okay? The reading is focused on, for example, starseed stuff. Or if it is a light-based reading, then, I wouldn't say like that's much a red flag unless you have all the other red flags popping up, then I definitely wouldn't work with that person. Because if it's not an underworld reading, it's not an underworld reading. But if you mention shadow work, or you mention the underworld, or you ask them, hey, what are my lifetimes that need healing? I noticed you mentioned this, and that, but what are the ones that need healing? What's relevant to what I'm doing right now? And they can't connect that. That's a red flag. Okay. Doesn't mean that they're not good at what they do, but you want a reader that can really bring that into the current situation and help you heal. Because if we're just looking at our Akashic records, and yes, it does help us figure out who we are at a soul level, right? But if we're just looking at our Akashic records to go, oh, well, in this dimension I do this, and at this timeline I did this, and it's like, ooh, I'm so special, and there's no application, there's no way to learn from it, there's nothing about growth there, then it's not doing you any favors. I want to talk about the different Akashic record realms or libraries, okay? So I already mentioned that each person has their own Akashic record library. Why is that? Because each person holds memory of their other lifetimes and dimensions, ancestral lines, things of that nature in their DNA. DNA is not just physical. It is multidimensional. It is a tree of life. It is the flower of life. It is the cosmic blueprint and other blueprints, not just cosmic, infernal, elemental, earth, all of that. That the DNA contains all of this, right? So even if you may have a hard time accessing all of that within the physical DNA, which you'll surely be able to access most of the ancestral stuff there, but definitely the multidimensional and etheric DNA will hold all of that. Therefore, you will have your own individual Akashic record, right? This is generally connected to the soul star Shukra, which is several inches above the crown Shukra, right? And this definitely corresponds with the 8th dimension in most cases. Now, That's if you're dealing with more soul energy records. If you're dealing with exclusively ancestral DNA records, this can be accessed through the Earth Star Chakra, which is located several inches, sometimes several feet below the feet, and also in the physical DNA. So depending on the way the reader accesses it, the clairs they use, they might be able to pull from different areas, but that's generally the location. These are gates. The chakras are gates. They're wheels. They are portals. They are access points, okay? As above, so below. As within, so without. I also want to talk about other lives versus past lives. So this is actually something that I'm going to be correcting on my website. So now that I've been doing Akashic record readings for several years, I have outgrown the concept of relying on the past lives and trying to create a paradigm of linear progress for the soul. And what I mean by that is those of you who have, gotten readings from me, even up until recently, probably not up until this month, but leading up until this month, you know that I will typically pride myself on my ability to access the primordial void for those of you who have that in your DNA, have that in your Akashic records, but also that I will identify a soul type and soul category, and I will say, well, your first life in this particular realm was here. Your first life in this particular realm was here. But here's the problem with that. Again, it's just a way to sort of create a structure for human understanding at this level, because this is where we're at right now. But I've grown to believe that it's not really helpful in trying to leave those paradigms. Like, some people can get stuck there. Like, for example, you might see even an Akashic reader be like, I am an Anunnaki starseed from serpents. And it's like, okay, what else? Like, where else have you been? Like, that's not the full scope of who you are, right? So that's why I want to get out of the habit of doing this. Now, if you're specifically looking for, okay, well, what incarnations did I have in the celestial realm? That's different. Okay, so I have DNA and soul family, and soul energy expressions in the following dimensions, or in the following realms, or in the following locations, or within the following species or races. It's different than saying, well, I'm this because this was my first incarnation. How do we document first incarnation? That time, as we understand at this level, doesn't even exist in the same way in all these other dimensions. If we're going to look at it from quantum expression of a multiversal reality, even within the cosmic universe concept, right? These lifetimes, depending on how you want to look at it, could be happening at the same exact time. Like rings on a tree or branches on a tree. So who are we to say what's first and what's last? Who are we to say that at this dimensional level is in a past life? Do you see what I'm saying? So this is why I want to get out of the routine or the paradigm or template of referring to things this way, even if I'm just doing it as a helpful tool, because I feel like it can really get people stuck in a very one-dimensional outlook. Now, you can resonate with one area over another, and that's fine, or maybe that will shift depending on what you're working on or what you're healing or what you're channeling from, but I just wanted to put that out there. So another thing I want to talk about is soul fragments from other lifetimes. This can be other timelines. This can be other dimensions. This can be other realms, okay? You can have soul fragments in these areas from trauma. How do we find these? Well, we would use the same tool that we would use for any other soul fragment retrieval. Going into the underworld, and we would focus on soul fragments from other lifetimes. And we could be more specific and say, oh, from lifetimes in the celestial realm. Oh, from other timelines of this earth existence. Oh, from different lifetimes of this earth existence. Oh, from different lifetimes of this existence. So this is what I mean. So when we set that precedence and we're going into the underworld and we're welcoming those types of soul fragments, then we can deal with that at that level. Another useful way of doing this is past life regression. I teach both on Patreon, depending on the tier you're in. I also do both as a service on my website. So if you want to do soul fragment retrieval specifically from other lifetimes or this lifetime, you can do that. You can book that through me on my website. If you wanted to, book a past life regression, you can do that too. It's different than a record reading. A record reading is me reading your records. A past life regression is me regressing you into your underworld state in order for you to recall certain lifetimes where you might need to heal from. Okay. Now, one thing I want to say real quick about the soul fragment retrieval, I'm not a fan of doing this if I personally haven't worked with you before or you're not in my shadow healing tier. The reason being is I consider soul fragment retrieval to be a little more complex than your standard stereotypical shadow work. And even though a lot of light workers will, misconstrue soul fragment retrieval and try to make it as though you can, draw all soul fragments to yourself, which please don't ever do that. And I've talked about that in other videos and other audio clips as to why you don't want to do that. But I'll just, sum it up now because this isn't what this video is about. What I'll say is you don't want to do that because when you're bringing in soul fragments, that broke away due to trauma. So it's essentially like welcoming back all of those traumatic feelings and shit back into yourself all at once without knowing where they came from, why they came from, what those soul fragments are going through or feeling once they were fragmented. And it can also cause major shifts in your personality, behavior patterns, even insanity in an extreme case. So please don't do that. There is a process of doing that step by step in the healing process. It's not about welcoming all back. That's like I talked about on YouTube. That is a way of doing soul fragment retrieval, doing shadow work, light work. We don't do that. Shadow work and light work have two totally different processes. Two totally different energy bodies that we're working to heal. So we go about it differently, but I digress. So I want to talk about how the DNA and the Akashic records correspond to each other. So as I mentioned before, the DNA is our blueprint. Okay. So as it shows up in our DNA at this physical level and this physical avatar is one spectrum of, wow. Frequencies, guys. And what I mean by that is just countless frequencies, countless lifetimes, countless expressions, countless dimensions, right? So this is just one aspect of that. So that's why I said there's DNA records and there are Akashic records, not just the personal one that we carry within us, but there are also different dimensional accesses to Akashic records collectively. Like if you want to tune into the collective Akashic records of this particular galaxy or this particular realm or this particular universe, you can do that if you have access to that dimensional frequency, okay? So there are different levels and different dimensions of Akashic records. I want to talk about quantum entanglement, and what this is when different aspects of ourselves or ourselves and others collide in different realms and different timelines at the same time, and it somehow ties in a real world way. Let me give you an example. Recently, obviously I'm not going to say what the client's name is because that would be breaking client confidentiality, but recently I had a client that I had dreamwalked with the night before. This particular client actually met me in the astral as a ghost, and I became a portal and psychopomp for that particular client to walk in, not reincarnate, but walk in to a willing avatar vessel. This all happened in the quote unquote past within the astral because the astral operates on a different spectrum of what we would call time. It's the fourth and fifth dimension mostly. And so it operates on a different quote unquote time spectrum. I wake up and the next day I have a booking that was made actually the day before for a client. And when I go online to do that Cosmic Akashic record for that client, it's the same person. Looks the same exact way, same accent, everything. So that soul or that aspect or that astral aspect or that ghost or however you want to say it, because again, different dimensions, right? That reached out to me that had been wandering in the astral that wanted to come back to this plane, that level of that being, right? Actually walked in the past when they were 5 years old in this current dimension. Their avatar was 5 years old when they walked in, right? And yet it was as though they were just in the astral that night before. That is quantum entanglement. That is how these different realms can work. So you can sit there and have a conversation with somebody in the present. Or let me give you another example. I had a ex-boyfriend of mine, his mother had passed away. And about, I want to say, it was a few months or maybe even a few years before she passed, I actually had a dream about her passing. The dream wasn't identical to like what happened, but it was just kind of letting me know. Then after she passed, I actually met her in the astral, but it looked like she had already crossed over to another realm, to a higher ancestral realm, but yet I was also talking to her in the astral. Why? Because it was quantum entanglement. And what that is you're dealing with one aspect or one version of somebody in one particular timeline while they may be somewhere else in another timeline or in another dimension. So she had already crossed over, but yet there she was talking to me in the astral. So that's what I mean. That is an example of quantum entanglement. It's really cool stuff. If you are lucky enough to experience it, it will definitely expand your, perception of reality and how all of these dimensions overlap. So the last thing I want to talk about, guys, before I wrap this up is soul contracts and assigned purpose. I used to try to tell people certain things I would find in their soul contracts, and I would, attempt to discern what their primary purpose and or mission was. I don't really do that anymore. So if somebody specifically asks and I feel led to say, okay, this is your primary or secondary focus of why you're here, I'll say it. But if I don't feel like I'm supposed to tell them, or if I don't feel like it's supposed to be said, or that's something that they're supposed to define for themselves, because that is something, everybody's here for a different reason. And ultimately that's the soul's choice, like what their actions are that lead them to each dimension or each reality. So it's not up to me to tell them what their purpose is. It's up for them to, discern that for themselves or to assign that to themselves alternatively. So as far as soul contracts are concerned, you absolutely can visit the Akashic records where the soul contracts are held, read them, alter them, amend them, delete them, add new ones. 100% you can. Now, one thing, and I've said this before on Patreon and on Facebook, I believe. I might have even mentioned it on YouTube. I don't think I have. But you are totally free to change your soul contracts. But you are not free from the implications or the effects of that. Okay? So every action has a consequence. So let's say, for example, that you had a soul contract to meet a certain person at a certain point in time in order for you guys to both grow. If you decide, oh, I don't want to do that, and you change that soul contract, yeah, you could absolutely change that soul contract, but you might want to think about, well, how is that going to affect that other soul? And then are you guys going to have to redo that in another lifetime somewhere else? And maybe it may even be something you like even less. So these are things to keep in mind. But yeah, that's pretty much it on things that people don't really talk about past, aka other lives, or the Akashic records or Akashic record readers and readings, and red flags to look for, things to focus on, things of that nature. Take care and shalom. Check out my website, thetantricdragonist.com, to book a private Akashic reading or any other reading. Also, Akashic portraits, consultations, shamanic journeys, starseed charts, primordial dragon fire healing, and much more. You can also subscribe to Patreon to learn how to do a lot of this yourself through various templates I've designed. activate diamond consciousness, activate the black flame, journey the underworld, tantric healing and BDSM, astral projection and power, shields, cloaks, wards, learning light language, exclusive and premier readings, soul fragment retrieval, advanced ancestral work, creating your own shamanic sanctuary, and much more. Thanks for your support, and stay tuned for future videos.